All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is the second in our webinar series on tax opportunities for tribes under the Inflation Reduction Act. The first one was a few weeks ago, and that was an overview webinar, and those slides and the recording are available on our website. Today will be a deeper dive on direct pay for tribes with the help of Wahela Johns, Director of the U.S. Department of Energy of the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs, and tax and tribal law experts from Holland Knight. My name is Molly Melius, and I am the Director of Stanford Law School's Lawyers for a Sustainable Economy Initiative. A few housekeeping items here before we get started. We are recording this webinar, as you probably noticed there at the beginning, but we will be turning off the recording during the question and answer portion. For folks who do want to submit questions, you can do so either through the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we'll be saving responding to those until the Q&A portion of the talk here today. Again, we'll be sharing this recording and the slides afterwards in case you missed anything or in case you want to share them with anyone. We've got two goals here today. You've probably seen there are a number of different webinars out there on the Inflation Reduction Act. We are just part of this larger movement to try to educate people on the opportunities for forwarding more green energy policy. And we're also hoping to provide another opportunity for direct pro bono legal assistance for entities that are still struggling with how to access these opportunities and need a little bit more one-on-one advice. The Lawyers for a Sustainable Economy Initiative is a pro bono initiative that supports nonprofits, tribes, early stage entrepreneurs, and others who are working on sustainability issues and who are trying to get some of these green projects going under the Inflation Reduction Act. It is a partnership that started back in 2018 with a few founding firms and a few of my colleagues here at Stanford, along with the support of the former California Attorney General and former Governor Jerry Brown. Over the past few years, 17 major law firms in the initiative have provided support to over 120 startups and for-profits, tackling some of these key sustainability challenges. So we have here today Wahela Johns, as I mentioned, the Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Program Director. She is responsible for upholding and advancing that office's mission to maximize the development and deployment of energy solutions for the benefit of American Indians and Alaska Natives. Wahela is a member of the Navajo Dene tribe and comes from northeastern Arizona. Her background is in renewable energy and community organizing, having co-founded Native Renewables, a nonprofit that builds renewable energy tribal capacity while addressing energy access. Under her tenure at DOE, the budget has tripled, which has provided additional funding to support tribal communities in pursuing energy sovereignty and energy goals, and has also really expanded the office with an additional 30 positions. After Wahela's remarks, the Holland Knight team shown here, who collectively have decades of tribal and tax law experience, will be presenting on some of the substantive information on direct pay, as well as fielding questions from the audience. You'll hear a little bit more about the Holland Knight team from Nicole after Wahela's remarks, so I will pass it to her now.
Thank you, Molly. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure what time zone everyone is in, but my name again is Wahela Johns, and I am just really honored to be a part of this webinar series and to talk about the importance of this elected pay, this new Inflation Reduction Act's sort of largest investment in, as I see it, through using the IRS and tax incentives to be able to have tribes participate. I mean, we have not seen anything like this where tribes that want to pursue large clean energy projects to be able to participate at this scale So I just want to say that I'm really happy that we're having this webinar series. This is actually my first time participating specifically around the tax incentives, especially for clean energy investment, and making sure that we are communicating, these opportunities to tribes, that this is, again, a huge opening for tribes to continue to lead the way towards a clean energy future. We have a number of incentives where tribes can use, if they are considered an energy community, you can get a 10% tax rebate. Also, you can, there's 12 actually areas in, if you look in the provision, that if you are trying to generate clean power on your land, if you are a low income community, you can benefit from this. And there's a thing that's called stacking. And we are also trying to create communications around the benefits of these tax incentives and the elective pay, direct pay, and transferability as well, and how tribes can really play a role in this and be at a place where that they can participate. And I'm just really excited. I've been watching how this is unfolding, and want to work directly with tribal leaders and tribal governments. If they have any questions, we might not know the answers directly, but we can definitely put you in the right, or connect you to the right people. And again, I've been working in this space of energy for many years, and the challenges of trying to do something at scale, utility scale, production scale, manufacturing scale, to be able to have a tax incentive opportunity to help pay for these projects is huge. I think it will create a lot of jobs. I think it will create a lot of regional economy growth, and with tribes leading the way. And so I just wanted to mention that, many of this is still in, I think we just, Chief Merlerba with the IRS, and just finished a tribal consultation last month. And comments just closed on this provision. So, I mean, we're going to hear a lot more, I think, from many of you. And if you do have comments, please let me know, and I can try to get it to the right people if you're a tribal leader. But, for our office, we deal directly with tribal nations, 574 federally recognized tribes. And I feel like this is a huge opportunity, and any way that we can help, I just wanted to make sure that we put a plug out there for our office, and then also Department of Energy. And we work really closely with other agencies that are focused on EV production and also manufacturing, and the different corridors. We also work closely with Interior and EPA. And so all of this, I think, is really going to help us tie the build out of this clean energy future in this country, and to make sure that tribes are participating. So I just will hand it back to you, Nicole, or Molly, but I really appreciate the time that you've given me to speak here today.
Very good. Thank you so much. We are delighted. Holland Knight is delighted to be here, both with the Lawyers for Sustainable Economy and Wahela Johns in this important webinar series. Holland Knight has both a robust Native American law team and an energy tax team. And that's really where this webinar series comes together, utilizing all of our experience. And we've been certainly working with several tribal clients on this topic. My name again is Nicole Elliott. I'm joined by my colleagues Amish Shah and Ken Parsons, and we are just 3 members of a larger team here at Holland Knight. Just to give you kind of an intro of our webinar series, it's 3 parts. Earlier in August, we did an overview of the IRA. That webinar and the recording is available through the Lawyers for Sustainable Economy. Today, we're here to talk to you about a deep dive, as we're calling it, on direct pay. And then later in September, we have a webinar planned to talk about 2 specific tax credits in the IRA, specifically the investment tax credit, or ITC for short, and the production tax credit, or PTC for short. Those are two tax credits where we feel tribes might be particularly interested in. And so that's why we selected those to do the deeper dive later. So we hope that you participated in our earlier webinar and will participate in our future webinar. And if you cannot, again, there'll be recordings available through the Lawyers for a Sustainable Economy. Our agenda today is to talk about direct pay. Now, you heard Wahela say elective pay. The first thing I want to say is that elective pay and direct pay are the same thing. It is in the statute called direct pay, and you'll hear some people refer to it that way. And then recently, I think particularly members of the federal government have chosen to say elective pay. So don't want to confuse anyone right off the bat. Elective pay is direct pay. So the webinar is, as Wahela said, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that is, provided a lot of benefits to tribes, not only through direct spending, but also through the tax code. And that's really been the entire subject of this webinar series. Today is just on direct pay. That is an entirely new mechanism as included in the Inflation Reduction Act. It allows tribes to receive cash benefits if they qualify for the underlying tax credits included in the IRA. So that's solely what we're here to talk about today, is this new mechanism called direct pay, also known as elective pay. We're going to talk about what is it. We're going to talk about the mechanics. How is it claimed? When is it claimed? How do I work with the IRS? And then, as Molly suggested, what we really wanted to be different here, because you've probably attended other webinars on direct pay, I certainly have, is we wanted to allow a lot of time for questions and answers. So this is your opportunity to put them in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we can answer them at the end of this webinar. So feel free to try to stump us. Again, collectively, we've got quite a few years of experience doing this, although these direct pay rules are new. But we're aiming to create a dialogue here to the extent that we can with your questions. Before we talk about direct pay and really what is it, I do want to go back one step and talk about the underlying tax credits, which you can get direct pay for. And there are 12 of them. And for that, I'm going to let Amish Shah, my colleague, give you an overview of those underlying tax credits, again, that tribes can elect for direct payment.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So direct pay is available for most of the tax credits that are available for clean energy projects. And I contrast that with, there are some other tax credits that are available to individuals. So an individual may put, for example, solar panels on their house and get tax credits. Those aren't part of what's eligible for direct pay. These are credits that are available generally for businesses or governmental entities or tribes. In other words, organizations. So the tax credits that are entitled to direct pay are fairly broad, and we put them into several categories. The first is energy generation. And this is for generating electricity from certain clean resources. So things we think of are things like wind and solar power. And we'll get more, as Nicole said, we'll get more into those tax credits in a deep dive in our next session on September 25th. But that's the first category. The second is clean fuels. And these are things that are low emitting fuels, things like biodiesel, hydrogen, and other sorts of fuels that may be used for transportation or other purposes that, again, have low carbon intensity scores, relatively clean fuels. Next, we have, we have the next slide. The next category is energy manufacturing. So these are credits for manufacturing products. So 48C is a credit for manufacturing equipment that will be used in a clean energy project. So, for example, manufacturing solar cells in the United States. This is a United States manufacturing tax credit. So this is for manufacturing certain equipment like batteries, components, solar equipment, or wind equipment in the United States. The 45X credit for manufacturing is for manufacturing certain other equipment within the United States. And for that, you need to have approval or an allocation from the government. And I think we spent a little bit of time talking about these last time. We can certainly answer any questions around some of these if people have those in the Q&A session. For clean vehicles, tax credits, continued tax credits for electric vehicles under 45W, and for other equipment associated with refueling that equipment. And then finally, carbon sequestration. This is for taking CO2 and capturing it and putting it deep underground so it's not emitted in the atmosphere. And that can be from existing facilities, or it can be from other facilities, for example, facilities that are generating power, but then taking the CO2 from that and sequestering it underground. Now, I think many of you may be thinking, well, we don't necessarily do these activities, but one of the things to keep in mind with all of these tax credits is that you may be building a solar facility and using equipment that's manufactured in the US. And so it's important to understand not only the credits that you may be looking to get, or that you may be looking to get direct pay on, but also thinking about if you're buying equipment or buying power from other parties, are they entitled to these tax credits, and are they entitled to direct pay? Because that may ultimately determine the price that you pay for purchasing this equipment or purchasing power from people who are doing these activities.
Great, thanks, Amish. So those were the underlying tax credits, the 12 underlying tax credits where tribes can elect for direct payment. And again, as I stated, don't get confused. Direct payment and elective pay are the same thing. Just different people call them by different names. They're otherwise synonymous. So a tax credit, generally speaking, is a dollar for dollar reduction of the taxes owed. So if I owe $10 at the end of the year in tax liability, if I had a $7 tax credit, it would mean that I would only actually owe $3 to the US federal government. That's how kind of generally, very broadly speaking, tax credit works. Historically, entities that did not pay federal income tax weren't particularly interested in tax credits because they had no tax liability. Tribes, for example, pay no federal income tax. So a credit isn't going to mean a lot. It's not going to necessarily incentivize behavior. The Inflation Reduction Act changed this by adding a new section to the Internal Revenue Code that allows certain tax-exempt entities, they're called applicable entities in the code, the ability to take advantage of these tax credits that Amish went over by seeking direct payment in the amount to which they're entitled. So we're going to talk a little bit more when we say tribes, we're kind of using a shortcut here, and Ken is going to talk a little bit more about what we mean when we say tribes. But keep in mind, in addition to just as it relates to tribes, other applicable entities who can seek direct payment are, for example, public charities, nonprofit organizations, state and local governments. So tribes are one of a few tax-exempt entities that have been named as applicable entities, thereby entitling them to direct payment. As was suggested at the beginning, Treasury recently issued some proposed regulations, if you go to the previous slide first, on direct pay. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was enacted a year ago, almost to the day. We knew, therefore, for a year that this direct payment was going to be an option for tribes, but a lot of it has been waiting for guidance from the US Department of Treasury and from the IRS around the rules, around how to actually do this. What are the right forms? So I just want to caveat this entire webinar today with, we are operating on the best information that we have available today. That includes proposed regulations that were issued. That comment period, the Treasury and IRS were seeking comment. That comment period has officially closed. However, there was also a tribal consultation conducted by Treasury. And I know they are still interested in receiving comments. And we have done that for many clients, which is, we like the proposed rules, but can you please clarify this? Or can you change the process this way? So again, just to caveat this whole entire webinar today, that we are operating on proposed rules and otherwise the best information that we have. And this is therefore all subject to change as we get closer. And if you are pursuing these tax credits and the direct payment option, please be mindful. Please make sure you're using the most recent guidance, the most recent IRS forms, etc. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ken Parsons, because we've been saying tribes can elect direct pay, and who are tribes and what does that include? Ken?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So the regulations actually talk about applicable entities, one of which includes tribes. It also includes state and local governments, tax exempt entities. But for our purposes today, we're going to focus on tribal governments and subdivisions and agencies or instrumentalities of tribal governments, all of which are eligible for these elective pay or direct tax credits. As well, ANCs are also available. So moving on to the next slide, I think we all know that tribes are eligible, but when we have a sub-entity like a district or a division, an authority, an instrumentality, all of these terms, all of these types of entities, the tribe isn't some monolith doing business on its own or building this qualifying property. So we need to know what types of tribal entities qualify. And I think that the guidance coming out in here also has to be considered in the context of the other regulation project that Treasury is working on right now, and that is the taxation of tribally chartered corporations as well as other business entities, because I think that a lot of these old tests might need to be explored when we consider what types of entities are eligible for these tax credits, tribal entities. So specifically, what is a subdivision, instrumentality, or an agency? So the subdivision at the top of the screen would be like a school district, typically a municipal type corporation. And an instrumentality or agency, I think, is a lot more familiar to some of us working in the tribal area. We could have our utility authority there. Typically, it's an organization that's established for a government purpose, performing a government service. But again, when we think about these types of entities, I think Treasury should be thinking more broadly about what a tribe might consider to be a government purpose. For example, would our entertainment authority qualify here? I think one of the problems, as you see on the screen, we have a 6-part test that the IRS historically has used for instrumentalities. One, how do we know for sure? How do we have certainty that our entity is going to qualify under these tests? So I'm looking for more guidance in this area, and also we're submitting comments from other clients, other tribes on these issues, because what we want is a bright line rule that our entities, our tribal entities, regardless of the purpose that they're for, are going to qualify for these tax credits. It shouldn't matter how the tribe is choosing to do the business or build the property for purposes of credits, really just that it's controlled by the tribe. So again, as Nicole mentioned, we don't have a lot of firm guidelines from the IRS right now. All this is just proposed. So I think this is one area where we really need to see more guidance from the IRS to really be clear which types of instrumentalities qualify.
So I'm going to ask Amish to cover kind of the basic of 3. So you've determined you are an applicable entity. Once final rules come out, or we're comfortable that we're an Indian tribal government, and therefore, for example, we're eligible to elect direct payment. Let's just talk about the 3 steps a little more in detail of like, what are the steps that need to be taken before I can like receive my check for this tax credit from the IRS?
All right, happy to start with that. As Nicole said, we've got 3 steps. First, you have to make sure that you're entitled to the tax credit, and then complete the pre-filing registration and request the direct payment on a tax return. So we'll talk about what each of those are if we can go to the next slide. So the first step is ensuring qualification for the underlying credit. So before we can even get to direct pay, which is a mechanism for receiving the cash associated with the tax credit, we have to make sure you're actually entitled to the tax credit itself. And each of the tax credits that we talked about, the 12 tax credits, has its own set of rules. And those rules are provided by statute, and then the IRS and Treasury, Department of Treasury, are also issuing guidance under those statutes. And they're either in the form of IRS notices, proposed regulations, and ultimately final regulations. You know, what we've seen so far is the IRS has issued some guidance. We're still awaiting other guidance, but nonetheless, a number of entities out there are still claiming these tax credits based on the information that we currently have available. But again, back to Nicole's caveat, we do expect further rules with respect to each of the 12 tax credits. And so you need to make sure you're keeping on top of what those rules are as they come out. So step 1, making sure that we're entitled to these tax credits. Now, part of that is that you have to, as a tribe, you have to actually own the property that's entitled to the tax credit. So for example, if we're talking about a solar farm, you have to own the solar farm, or you have to be conducting the activity that gives rise to the tax credit. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here, and this comes up and has come up over the years with these energy tax credits, is that having legal title where ownership is required, simply having legal title to property is not enough. What the tax rules look to is they take a deeper look at not only who has legal title to property, but whether or not you have the benefits and burdens of ownership of the property. Or whether or not you are actually the one that's controlling the activity, so you're actually treated for tax purposes as conducting the activity. So again, just to keep in mind, it's important not to look at just what the documents and the papers say in terms of who owns a property and conducts the activity, but to take a deeper look at who's really undertaking the activity or owning the property. And then the third thing is under the proposed rules that Nicole had talked about before and Ken had mentioned, partnerships aren't allowed to use direct pay. So if you have a number of applicable entities, including tribes, that are partners in a partnership, the partnership, even though it has applicable entities as partners, is not allowed to have direct pay. And so that may limit the ability to use direct pay for Indian tribal governments that want to form a partnership and own property with other entities. And so there are other ownership structures that can work if you want to conduct activities with other entities, and they include having tenants by the entirety, or what we call electing out of subchapter K, making an election to not be a partnership. Now, just to be clear, when we're talking about partnerships here, we're talking about tax partnerships. So there's no prohibition on getting direct pay if you enter into an agreement with an EPC contractor to develop the project, or enter into an agreement with someone to operate the project on your behalf, or enter into agreements with the consultants to help operate or develop the project. Those are all the sorts of things you can do. So you can work with lots of other entities to develop and operate a project. The constraint here is where you enter into a tax partnership. And a tax partnership is really a situation where you are conducting an activity together with another entity, and you tend to do that as a partnership. And so I know that's a bit of a fine line there to draw, and one we can look at for any particular project. But again, the key to remember is we just want to make sure, go ahead and operate projects, develop projects using a lot of the resources out there that people use to develop projects with. But if you are looking to really jointly operate a project with someone going forward, make sure that it's not through what we call a tax partnership. Otherwise, the direct ability to claim direct pay may be lost.
Great. So you are now past step one, which was make sure you qualify for the underlying tax credit. And now you're at the stage of wanting to seek payment for that tax credit, because again, as a tribe, for example, you don't have any federal income tax. So actually claiming a tax credit off of your taxes makes no sense. So step two requires a pre-filing registration. This was included in the IRA. It really, I think, was aimed at ending or trying to help eliminate abuse and fraud. If you can imagine, the IRS is going to be sending out a lot of checks. And so how does it verify that you are who you say you are, you're building what you've said you're going to build? And part of the answer to eliminating this fraud and abuse, or assisting in eliminating it, is this pre-filing registration process that's contemplated. It is not currently available. It is being built as we speak. Several of us on this call have beta tested the IRS website, but think of it as, and it is only online, I should say. It will require some general upfront information from you and from your tribe. It certainly will require your EIN. That would be a good way for the IRS, for example, to track that there's not, multiple registrants claiming the same credit for the same property. And it will likely require you to enter some basic information about what is the credit to which you're going to seek direct payment. What is the location of the facility, if appropriate? What was the start of construction date? It may require you, for example, to upload permits or contracts or something to really show the IRS that, you know, this project does exist, you do exist as a tribal government, et cetera, et cetera. We do not know, you know, how long this process will take. The end goal of this pre-filing registration is that at the end of it, the IRS is going to give you a unique number, and you will need that unique number for step 3. So that's the whole purpose of why you have to do this, and why you kind of have to do it at the right time, is to get that unique number. I should also say that it is a project by project registration. So it is not the pre-filing registration of the tribe itself for all things it wishes to do, but it will require some specifics. So in my very cute picture there, I have the tribe trying to qualify for the Section 45W credit through an EV vehicle, and then an investment tax credit through the installation and placing in service a wind turbine, for example. In that scenario, that is 2 registrations and 2 unique numbers that are going to be required. Again, unfortunately, this website, this online process portal is not yet available, but we're just gathering this information from not only the from guidance from the IRS, but also some of our, from our testing that we've been doing with the IRS. Just a note on timing, I think that is also kind of something that is to be determined. It clearly, step 2 clearly has to happen before step 3. And because it's not clear how long the IRS will take to kind of process that information here and give you the unique number, I think it's also not clear kind of A, when this portal will open, and B, what's the right timing to submit. Generally speaking, what the IRS has said is that the pre-filing registration and the number is kind of good for a year, and you might have to go back and renew it. And you might have to go back and the guidance contemplates and change, you know, if your circumstances change, there may be instances in which the IRS is going to require you to go back into this registration process and kind of update the information. But it's certainly, step 2 is certainly going to be required before step 3. So again, a little bit to be determined, but something if you're intent on taking direct payment for these credits to be watching as kind of the IRS rolls out this pre-filing registration process.
Yeah, speaking of step 3 and things to be determined, we reach the return filing requirement. So as Nicole was talking about earlier, a tax credit requires there to be a tax return. And for a while, it was a little uncertain what return the IRS is going to require that tribal governments and other exempt entities that don't have a tax return filing obligation were going to need to file to get these credits. So the IRS came out with proposed guidance that the form is going to be 990T, which is very familiar to a lot of tax exempt entities, but not so familiar to tribal governments, and state and local governments still typically file tax returns. So the 990 is the annual return for a tax exempt organization like your regular charities. And the 990T is for their unrelated business income tax. But if you look at the 990T, it's hard to see how that form could be used for this purpose for tribes, because it's got a lot of intrusive and irrelevant information that shouldn't be necessary for a tribe to claim the tax credit. So a lot of our tribal clients were commenting on this particular form and the information requested by the IRS. And just recently, they did update and provide a draft of what will be required. And it's a skinny down version of the 990T. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to talk about the due date. So typically, that would be 4.5 months after your established accounting period. So if you're on a calendar year, that would be 4.5 months after December. But for tribes and other entities that don't file a tax return, there's an automatic 6-month extension. So you can actually wait until 10.5 months after the close of your calendar year to file for these credits. So that's the good news. The bad news is you can't be late and you can't amend the return. So you've got a lot of time, but you got to do it and you can't be late. So I think a mixed bag there. When you're filing the return, you've also got to include other information like the Form 3800, which is the General Business Tax Credit form. But again, there's a lot of unknowns here, as I was alluding to earlier, and also at step 2, as Nicole was mentioning. So with this particular form, the 990T, the IRS has said that, okay, you file the 990T, tribes, but you don't have to include all the information we usually request, like what's your annual income, what's your unrelated business income, those kinds of things you don't have to say on the form. But it still isn't perfect, because the IRS currently, in the current form, that the draft they published, they're still asking for the book value of the assets. Yeah, how is that relevant to the tax credit? And that should be something that tribes should need to be reporting. But at least currently in the draft form, that's something that's requested for. And there are some other information that's requested in the form that I think ultimately the IRS will revise and make it more suitable for tribes. But right now it's a work in progress, and they do need to be hearing from us, from tribes, about why that's not appropriate, what kind of information tribes should be and should not be disclosing on these forms.
Okay, so we've talked about kind of what the 3 steps are to getting the tax credit. Now, if we take that and we think about the big question when people ask is, okay, so when do we get the cash associated with this? And then at the end of the day, that's a key consideration here on the direct payment or elective payment availability. So I think it's important to take what we just talked about in terms of 3 steps and put some timing parameters around that. So the first thing is that the tax credits are available after tax credits are direct payment is available after the tax credits become available. So what that means is, for an investment tax credit, the tax credit's available once a project is placed in service. For a production tax credit, the tax credit's available as the activities are being undertaken that give rise to the production tax credit. So if we start with an example on that, so if a tribe places a solar project in service in March of 2024, it will be entitled to a tax credit in March of 2024. And so once the project is placed in service in March of 2024, it'll undertake the pre-registration process that Nicole talked about. And it'll have to get a registration number, as Nicole talked about. And it's not clear how long that'll take, but it has to do that before the tax return is filed. So now, presumably, it'll have the pre-registration filing done. It'll have its registration number, and then it can use that and file the Form 990T that Ken talked about. And they can file that by the due date, May 15th, 2025, or on extension. And once it files a tax return, then it's made its application effectively to get the direct payment from the government. And once it does that, the IRS may make that payment rather quickly, or it may decide that it wants to audit the tax return and take a closer look at some of the facts underlying the tax return. And again, that audit may be quick, or if they have disagreements or challenges, it may take longer to get the cash payment until the audit's done. So what does that mean in terms of, so that's the timing of getting the cash. So what does that mean in terms of financing? So the question often comes up of, I'm spending my cash during construction. When do I actually get my tax credit in order to help fund that construction? So during the construction period, there are no tax credits available because a project isn't placed in service and it's not actually producing any equipment or any other things that you need to do to get the tax credit for production tax credit purposes. So during construction, you're often going to see that you have to go get construction financing, usually through some third-party lender, unless you already have the cash available to build the project without financing. And then the construction financing is generally paid off at the time the project's placed in service. But here, under direct pay, there's going to be a gap in time generally between the time the project is placed in service and when you get the cash from the government. And so, again, in terms of making sure we're financing the project, you're going to need to make sure that there is some mechanism to be able to pay the construction financing off at the time the project's placed in service and the time that you actually get the cash a number of months later on, some sort of interim financing. So again, just something to think about in terms of financing these projects vis-a-vis the timing of getting the tax credits under the direct pay mechanism.
Some important considerations on direct pay. One is similar to one of the ones we talked about in our last presentation, if you were there, about kind of leveraging the opportunities with direct pay with other opportunities, say through the Inflation Reduction Act or other federal monies that have been distributed to tribes. So it's important to know that there's no prohibition on using direct pay and federal or state grant funding for projects. You can get both. So you can use federal or state money and get the credit for the same project. There is, however, a limitation that if you're using grant money that's for a specific project for which you're claiming the credit, then your credit could be limited. So that's something to keep in mind. But generally speaking, a credit from, say, using money from fiscal recovery funds that you got from ARPA, for example, wouldn't be implicated here because it wasn't a credit that was for a specific purpose to purchase this type of property or construct this type of energy property. So again, you can use the money from that pot of money and use the grant money here without it being limited. The other thing I wanted to note here on this slide is Nicole was going through the registration process earlier, the step 2. And when you go through that for a particular property, the IRS will issue a registration number. And you might think, oh, great, now I'm good to go. But you have to go through all the steps. And one of those steps is ensuring that your property, your project qualifies for the credit. So just because the IRS issues that registration numbers to you through the pre-filing registration process, it doesn't mean you got the credit. It just means that you can apply for the credit, but you still have to prove that you qualify. And you can still get audited, as we put in that red bold there. Next slide, please.
So as we have said several times over, this is kind of we have some information and more will be coming out. And there are resources out there that should be checked regularly as things develop. The IRS has some nice FAQs on its website. Again, they call it elective pay, not direct pay, but it goes through in kind of a very plain English, I think, way what this all means and some of the topics that we covered today. There is a new publication out there aimed at tribal entities and direct pay, and that's 4817. And then the notice of the guidance that we've been speaking about over and over again, we included references to those in this slide, specifically the Federal Register, where you could go and look up those proposed rules. And then the temporary regulations kind of go through some of the procedure and process that we talked about. But that's really what we're working with today, and certainly will be updated, I am sure, by the government as we move forward. I wanted to then take a minute here before we take questions and answers, and feel free again. I see about 4 or 5 questions. Please ask them. We will do our best to answer them in this presentation. And again, wanted this to be an opportunity really to have somewhat of a back and forth as we go through this topic. But these next 2 slides kind of put together what we talked about during our last webinar and what we've spoken about today. So in this example, we're using the investment tax credit, which is one of the 12 underlying tax credits that we've been talking about. Generally speaking, as we covered last time, this tax credit is for things like solar panel, certain energy storage, things that produce renewable energy or store energy. If the certain prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules, certain labor conditions are met, the tax credit is 30%. That is the value of the tax credit. And then, as was asked in a question, we see that 30% can be bumped up if certain additional things are met, if certain additional requirements are met. And those are, as it relates to the investment tax credit, certain rules about domestic content, looking at, okay, where does this project that you're placing in service get its steel or its iron from, or its products from? Placement in an energy community gets you an additional value, so it moves that 30% needle up. And then placement or in connection, and if you receive an allocation, that one is a little bit different. And again, we'll be doing a deeper dive on this. Low-income community, which includes Indian tribal lands, can also bump up that 30% even further for the investment tax credit. So that is just the basics of the investment tax credit example. And in the next slide, I will show you kind of how it all works together and then add direct pay on top. So in our example, this was the exact same one we used on our last session. a tribe purchases and places into service a solar panel on its roof of its administrative building, and it costs the tribe $500,000. The base credit, if you do meet none of the extra bonus conditions, is 6% or just $30,000. If we meet labor conditions, it goes up to 30%. And then you have the additional bonus amounts. And there is a way to connect all of those bonuses, and there is a pathway to get as high as 70%. So your 6% can go as high as 70%. One of those bonuses does require an allocation, so an application into the IRS to get a piece of the allocation. But if we layer that on top of kind of our direct pay, what we've been talking about today, here again, step one is the tribe places the solar panels in service. It meets all of the various requirements for the underlying tax credit, which in our example is the investment tax credit. The tribe also completes the pre-filing registration process online to obtain its unique registration number. And then when the time comes, the tribe files the annual return, which for tribes is the 990T. That's what the IRS has determined, electing for a direct payment. And in this example, the tribe has spent $500,000, and it happened to have met all of the extra bonus. And in this case, when the tribe is filing its 990T for this particular project, it's in essence asking the IRS for a check for $350,000. So you can see here, hopefully, the benefit of thinking about these tax credits and thinking about kind of how the IRA unleashed the possibility for tribes, instruments, agencies, subdivisions, Alaska Native corporations to take the tax credit, which historically, again, may have meant something if they were joint partnering or other kind of ownership structures, but the tribe really to take advantage of these tax credits included in the IRA by adding this mechanism of direct pay, also known as elective pay. I think those are our slides for today. We're going to turn off the recording so we can kind of have an off the record Q&A session.